Hello, my name is PJ Lucky, and I serve as the Director of Student Diversity and Multicultural Affairs here at Fairfield University. We would like to welcome you to the Diversity in Action podcast. At Fairfield University, by encouraging dialogue, communication, community partnerships, and a culture of understanding around diversity, equity, and inclusion, we foster in our students, faculty, and staff the capacity and desire to build a better world. We embrace, support, and celebrate the unique characteristics of diverse identities and cultures. Fairfield is committed to diversity and action. For our first episode, our topic is radical hospitality. Joining us today is the Vice President for Mission and Ministry, Father Jerry Blaschek. Welcome, Father Jerry.
Thank you so much for inviting me, PJ, and I'm privileged to be part of this series. As any of you know who know PJ, it's impossible to say no to that smile. If you like my easy acceptance and my joyful acceptance of PJ's invitation also is a form of paying back a debt of gratitude. As some of you know, I had been here for a few years. And then I was called away to do some work for the Jesuits in another part of the world. And when I came back, one of the people who had never met me before, but who welcomed me warmly was PJ Lucky. And, every institution changes. Every institution has both its strengths and its weaknesses. But I'm actually kind of a reserved person and sometimes an anxious person. And so for me, it was particularly important to meet somebody as welcoming and as accepting and as enthusiastically, open-armedly welcoming as PJ. So PJ, this is to say thank you for your expression of hospitality. You're a natural for it, PJ. It seems to come from, I know it does come from your heart.
Father Jerry, thank you, man. How can I top that? Oh, man. Thank you, Father Jerry. Again, it's a privilege to have you on. And again, I remember the day that we met. Actually, man, we drove to New York. And
that's right. PJ, not only did he welcome me, he helped me carry about 1,500 books from a Jesuit community in the center of Manhattan. So there we were, lifting, tugging, pulling these books and bringing them from Manhattan up here to Fairfield. They're all here in the Murphy Center for Ignatian Spirituality if you want to come and see the fruit of PJ's sweat and labor.
Oh, man. But, Father, the importance was, we were serving together. And I believe that's what started this great bond that we have.
Yeah.
And with that said, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Maybe, your hometown, something that most people wouldn't know about you.
My hometown is important in that I would say, actually, the two places that I grew up with and that are most important to me very much mark my perspective on things and explain a lot about, I think, who I am here and what really matters to me. My family both sides of my family came from the absolute poorest corner of what we now call Poland. It was part of either the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Russian Empire, but they came from a province called Galicia that was densely populated, that was incredibly diverse: Russians, Ukrainians, Poles, Germans, Litwaks, large Jewish population, but desperately poor. And so my grandparents, all four of them, came from this poor region, and they settled in the mountains of northeastern Pennsylvania, where the coal mines were employing as many European, especially Eastern European and Central European immigrants as they could get. Because the work was backbreaking, and only people who were really desperate would go into the bowels of the earth and be in grave danger every time they went in there. Since then, I've taken a tour of these mines, these coal mines in northeastern Pennsylvania, and I'm harrowed at what my grandparents endured. And as my grandmother, I would sometimes say to my grandmother, Babci in Polish grandma, I said, Grandma, why don't you ever go back like Mrs. Papadopoulos goes to Greece or Mrs. O'Brien goes back to Ireland? Why don't you ever go back and visit Poland? And she said to me, son, why would I ever go back to a place where all I knew is poverty and misery?
Man.
So I grew up with a very strong consciousness. So all of my grandparents, my aunts, and my uncles worked in the mines. Their wives worked in sewing plants that were set up again to take advantage of immigrant workers. And I say take advantage because the wages for both the women and the men were were low. The
Yes, sir.
immigrants were desperate. They put up with inhumane and unsafe uh, places of work. One of my grandfathers was had a better education than the other, and so he
Hmm.
tried to do some union organizing, and he was blackballed, and he couldn't get a job working in any mine, and so the family
Man.
endured great poverty and suffering because of
Yes,
an
sir.
effort to try to represent the needs of people. It was almost impossible because the mines were owned by the people who, in fact, were in collusion with local and state government. And so
Interesting.
the mistreatment of workers, the exploitation of immigrants cuts close to the bone for me. This is not
Yes, sir.
theoretical. This is not somebody else's story. This is my story. And my father, his first job to support his large family was to work in the mines. And he
Mm.
saw one of his cousins blown up in a mine accident. So he said, that's it. And he joined the Navy. And
Okay.
that was the context of a lot of, if you didn't work in the mines, then you joined the military. Uh,
Yes, sir.
so exploitation, poverty, immigration. And these were still times when, as I was mentioning in a recent meeting, where my grandparents and my aunts and uncles would tell me it was still a time when there would be signs in windows, Polacks need not apply. Um,
Man.
uh, and by mentioning that, I don't mean to tell the story as if to say, well, we've been through it too, and
Hmm.
we know what it means not to matter. I would never equate the experience of European immigrants, as horrible as it was, with the experience of human beings who were enslaved and
Yes,
who
sir.
systematically were deprived for generations and unto the present. But on the other hand, I think I began to be prepared for the reality of exploitation, inequality, and exclusion because of race or because of social class. And I think there has always been a sensitivity and a
Hmm.
passion and a revulsion at exploitation of human beings. The other place where I lived that has affected me most was Dallas, Texas.
Okay,
My family
Dallas.
moved to, and this is something, PJ, that I don't, unless I'm talking with folks from the South, then my Southern accent does come out, but otherwise it doesn't. And so that's something people wouldn't know. Uh, People have never seen pictures of me in high school wearing a Texas hat, a Texas Rangers hat, because that's who we were. Our Jesuit high school, we were the Rangers, and so we
Yes,
all
sir.
we all wore black cowboy hats. So hard for anybody to think of me as a cowboy, and I'm not. But what happened to me in Texas, built on my being. We say where I'm from in northeastern Pennsylvania. We say that we have coal dust under our fingernails. That if you come from a family like that, you know who you are. You don't have any
Yes, sir.
illusions about who you are and where you come from. There's still
Hmm.
coal dust under my fingernails because those were the people who gave up their lives to try to make a beginning for me and my generation. But when we
Yes,
moved to
sir.
Texas, um, this explains more about me than I can possibly express easily. PJ, I think I did share this with you in one of our
Okay.
conversations. It will be almost unimaginable for most of you who hear this I may have credibility only because I'm old and gray, but but please believe me that the high school I went to, the Jesuit College Prep, it's called now, was just we were more modest then. It was just Jesuit High School in Dallas. We were the only integrated secondary school in the city, and that
Yes, sir.
came from a deliberate decision by the Superior General of the Jesuits, who woke up the American Jesuits and said, you guys, your record on racial equality and desegregation is not what it should be.
Okay.
Uh, and reminded the Jesuits, as horrific as it is for me to say, that some of the Jesuits in different parts of the country were slaveholders. I say that with unbelievable shame and regret, and I can offer no rationale.
Yes,
There's no
sir.
explanation except the hideous explanation of human sinfulness and societal corruption. Anyway, so the Jesuits, by the time I reached Dallas, the school had never been segregated, but at the prompting of our Jesuit Superior General, uh, made efforts to further integrate the school. Remember, the only integrated high school. And I graduated, I was there in the
Man,
1960s. That's how far away we are, or how
yes,
close
sir.
we are to
Close. Yes,
segregation.
sir.
It did not go well. When the
Okay.
Jesuits became known as people took notice of the fact, this is in the 60s, people took notice
Hmm.
of the fact that not only were there African American students at our school, but that we were aggressively recruiting African American students, and that African American students were representing our high school on our sports teams, on our debate teams, in our drama productions, which were very well known in the city at that time. The repercussions were grave. The number of benefactors who withdrew any support of the school. We were supposed to be in a major building moment, and it had to be canceled because
Yeah.
benefactors said, we won't support that kind of a school. Well, there was a
Ooh.
large steel cross in the front of the school,
Yes, sir.
and I have keen memories. In order to get into school, to the great panic of our parents would drop us off, and we would have to brave our way through picket lines from the American Nazi Party and the KKK. And sometimes we would come in and discover that the cross had been burned.
Man.
So hatred, racially animated hatred, was the world that we grew up in. And
Yes,
so
sir.
daily, we were woken up to that reality.
Hmm.
This was in the 60s. And we know how hard it is for people in our own day and in our own time to acknowledge the depth and the poisonous nature of racism toward African Americans in particular. I should mention
Yes, sir.
that Dallas uh, also had a very large Mexican American population. But again, and so the school tried hard to welcome Mexican Americans. But more than that, when we were at that school,
Hmm.
the Jesuits came up with a scheme which was almost preternaturally savvy and sensitive, given that time.
Okay.
We would go down to South Dallas, or West Dallas, which was the center of the Hispanic Dallas, and we would help our age mates in English. But here was the smart piece, that they would help us learn Spanish.
Oh,
So
that's amazing.
it
That's
was a
amazing.
two-way street.
Hmm.
And and for the first time in my life, I experienced the glories of real homemade Mexican food. Which has never. never failed to delight me. But I mention that because I think it was part of growing up
Yes, sir.
that there was that we were that again the reality. At home, growing up in northeastern Pennsylvania, it was the exploitation uh, of uh, of immigrants and working class people by government
Hmm.
and industry, linked together by their own mutual concern to exploit. Um, in Dallas, it was the reality of racial injustice and bigotry and anti-black uh, racism.
Yes, sir.
That again was nothing I read about in books,
Hmm.
but
Well,
was
Father.
alluded to. And I think when I decided I was a fairly I was not a dweepy kid, but I was fairly devout, and so
Hmm.
the ministry appealed to me. But when I met the Jesuits, so I presumed that I would join a local church, where my family lived, that I'd be a priest in a local parish in what we call in the
Okay.
Catholic Church a local diocese. But no, when I saw the Jesuits uh, recognize that there was injustice and that our
Hmm.
faith compelled us to do something about injustice. So it was never presented to us as charity. This is unjust. And
Yes,
our
sir.
faith compels us to act against injustice. So there was no saying, okay, well, things, we have to make things peaceful. We want to overcome, tensions. I'm thinking of, one of Dr. King's great sayings. If you, you know, what we're doing is not trying to resolve tensions. We have to, that's not what peace is. Peace is not the resolution of tensions. Peace is the result of justice. Uh, and I don't know that it was ever put to us in exactly those terms, but we knew it. We knew that this was unjust and that
Yes, sir.
our action uh, was necessary because of our faith. Uh,
Yes,
that we
sir.
couldn't call ourselves followers of Jesus. And that's what the Jesuits told us and made no apologies about. And the fact that we saw that all of us
Hmm.
had to be prepared to take risks because
Yes,
our
sir.
sisters and our brothers were being harmed. Because the integrity of the human family was being violated.
Yes, sir.
Something had to be done. And would it be costly? Maybe, yes. Um, I remember, but it was probably a bit of adolescent bravado. And it was probably
Uh-huh.
really just, to put it very candidly, to piss off my father. But, I was delighted to be involved with uh, demonstrations against racism and for integration. And
Yes,
my
sir.
father was angry that I was probably not getting his permission, and my mother was worried because there was reason to worry. Don't forget
Yes,
that
sir.
Dallas was the city where John F. Kennedy was killed.
Yes, sir.
Not for nothing, right? The racism,
Yes,
the
sir.
hatred, and candidly, I remember keenly the day that Kennedy was killed. I was a boy in high school.
Hmm.
The Dallas Morning News had a black framed full page ad warning the good citizens, the good Christians of Dallas against the conspiracy by Negroes, Jews, and Jesuits to destroy Southern culture and heritage. Later,
Man.
I reflected that we were never in such good company, you know, uh,
Man.
but that's what that culture was like.
Yes, sir.
I used the
Yes,
past
sir.
tense. Maybe the past tense is not the accurate tense.
Well,
So,
Father Jerry, thank you so much for being so vulnerable, man, to share really your experience. And I think it definitely shines some light on, why you do what you do. With that said, you know, speaking of radical hospitality, can you share a little bit about this concept
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
how it aligns, with the work that we do here at Fairfield
Right.
University?
Can I tell one more story first?
Please.
The most important formative experiences in terms of not just my being a Jesuit, but my commitment to this notion of radical hospitality. It does go back to the sensitivity of being a coal miner's grandson and growing up where I
Yes, sir.
did. It came from being where I was and being exposed to violence and severe racism, and the example of people who were willing to fight for justice. But the last piece, especially about hospitality, and here I have to warn you that it's a good thing that you can't see me maybe as clearly as if you would in person, because I'm liable to get teary. Um,
Yes, sir.
the other most important period of my life vis-a-vis radical hospitality, when I was without doubt the beneficiary of radical hospitality. I was assigned to teach in a new seminary that the Jesuits were opening in Nairobi, Kenya.
Yes, sir.
Being the kind of person I am, I did my homework and I read about British colonial occupation of Kenya. I read about what the struggle for uhuru, for freedom, was like.
Mm-hmm.
I read what the British concentration camps for those who resisted the ongoing British control of Kenya. I read what those conditions were like. What I could never, ever have been prepared for
Mm-hmm.
was the spirit of karibu, welcome, of the Kenyan people. If I can remember what was done to my grandparents, Kenyans that I lived with and who welcomed me unconditionally and radically,
Mm-hmm.
certainly knew where their grandparents had been, how their land had been taken, how they had been reduced, if not to slavery, peonage, or almost the life of a serf.
Mm-hmm.
They knew what it was like to have their own country, their traditions stomped on, their languages ridiculed, their cultures bashed, and economically exploited. How was it, how is it, I would ask myself, that I was received with such exquisite generosity? And it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
because I was a priest. How is it that my clumsy efforts at speaking Swahili and my needs, which were immediate and gross and physical, were taken care of with a kindness and a sensitivity which I did not experience from my own Jesuit confreres in the most difficult of times? When I was sick, as I often was because I was vulnerable to a lot of diseases, when I was desperately sick with cerebral malaria,
Yes, sir.
it was my Kenyan friends who carried me through and who
Yes,
took
sir.
care of me in every conceivable way. In Kenya,
That's
in
amazing.
Swahili, we say, Ume karibishwa. You are most welcome. Ume karibishwa. You walk into a house, karibu keti. Welcome, sit down, welcome. And it's not an empty formula. There is
Mm-hmm.
something that is so profoundly deep. I don't want to speak, too broadly, but there is something in the hearts of the Kenyan people of many different ethnicities with whom I lived, because I lived in a township. I lived in a very rough and difficult, economically and physically rough place, but I never felt safer.
Mm-hmm.
I never felt more cared for. I never felt freer
Yes, sir.
in my life than in this all Kenyan world that despite history, could see my humanity and welcomed me not as one more Mzungu, one more European, not as, the look of and the smell of the oppressor, though that would have been legitimate.
Yes, sir.
They saw me, and not even as the padre, they saw me in my humanity
Yes, sir.
with a sensitivity and a clarity and a wisdom that I think gave me my most profound sense of umekaribishwa, of what it is like to be welcomed. I would not have survived but for the welcoming spirit of the Kenyan people who cared for me, who loved me. There are only 2 times in my life that I completely lost control and wailed like a child. At my mother's death and when I had to leave Kenya.
Yes, sir.
Kenyans have a tradition when somebody that they love is leaving, they will take buses to the airport and they accompany you through baggage check-in, through immigration, through boarding pass time, and they dance you through all of this.
Man.
And at the same time, as you pass through the final barrier, then starts the ululation. Very high-pitched women's voices. Well, that was it.
Yes, sir. Father, that's amazing. I mean, you can just hear the passion and the freedom that you mentioned. I mean, to me, that sounds like true radical hospitality when you can allow someone to feel free.
That's right.
In your home or your community.
That's right. That's right, PJ. That's right. When there's the capacity of heart to look past distinctions which you have been told are definitive and defining and separating. My Kenyan friends, they saw past all that. And not because there was anything special about me. That's the genius of hospitality. It doesn't have to be earned. And it can't be lost.
Yes, sir.
Because the essential truth of my humanity and theirs met and matched and meshed. So there is a receiving and a giving, and certainly, though if you would put it this way to my friends, they would have said, well, that really, that's not what it's about. In our more kind of, commercially dominated world, we would say, well, there's an enrichment, but that would be, to use a term like that would have been almost obscene to my friends. It's not about rich or poor. This is, it is what it is.
Yes, sir.
It is what it is. And you are who you are. And that I want you to be a part of my life because you're umtu, you're a man, you're my ndugu, you're my brother.
Yes.
Kenyans use that language all the time, ndugu wangu, my brother. People would say that. Or me, they would say, they would call me Baba or father. But it wasn't like, oh, the priest is up on the pedestal. It was a respect for age.
Yes.
But, to use that family language is to affirm why Hospitality is not something you make up. It's not like, okay, so we forget our differences and we create an artificial common space. I don't know for what purpose. Um, but the hospitality I'm talking about is the recognition, the heartfelt, clear recognition that we are one, that we are at home with one another because we're
Yes,
one
sir.
family. And your differences are the differences within a family. That the context is
Mhm.
the oneness, the umoja, the oneness,
Yes.
of the jama, of the family.
Yes, sir.
So hospitality is not an artificial expansion of the family. It's the integral and enlightened understanding of who we really are.
Yes.
So it's not like
Yes.
I'm going to pretend and I'll pretend that PJ is my brother. No, it's seeing him in all of his splendid PJ-ness as the blessing he is,
Yes, sir. Father,
and that his
this
life matters to me as much, or because I'm older, his life matters to me more than my life matters to me, because I want a future for him and I want
yes, sir.
him to flourish. And it's okay that my days are numbered and that I would prefer whatever is left for my flourishing to go for his flourishing, or the flourishing of anybody else whose flourishing is at risk or jeopardized because of scarcity.
Yeah. Yeah. Father, I just wonder, and I'm not sure if you have the answer to this. And I know we've been in a remote world lately, right? Where, we've been physically distanced from each other, many of us. And, we have different students or even people getting new jobs, different organizations. I mean, new babies being born to different families. How during this socially, or I more so like to call it physically distance, because I feel like we still need to be social beings.
Right.
Um, how during this physically distanced time do we continue to uphold this value? I mean, you mentioned so many things of how we serve each other. How do we express that during this time?
PJ, I don't have the answer. Probably, again, I'm saying I'm old. That's not an excuse, but I think, technology is providing us with new means. And so I really do hand that responsibility over to you and to people who can be creative with the various forms of social media that are at hand. My job probably is to reinforce what you said, that the gesture, even the apparently almost superfluous uh, gesture is not superfluous. There's these
Yeah.
gestures and the need to find means of showing the people who are around us, you do matter.
Yes.
I think that language, and PJ, we've been on other things together where um, part of part of the gift of Black Lives Matter is that verb or that expression uh, we have to look at with greater intentionality to find a way to say to the people around me, you matter to me.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I agree.
what do I need more? I mean, to put it the other way, there have been contexts, either an office or a group of people, or maybe even extended family, uh, or even colleagues. If I walk into a place here at the university where people look past, and again, this is physical, right? But if people
Mhm.
look past me and you realize that you're one more number, or really, since you have nothing to offer them in terms of what they want, you don't matter. What is
Yeah.
more demeaning and deflating and dehumanizing? What makes me feel worse than to feel as though I don't matter to anybody here?
Yes, sir.
So I think it begins with my acknowledging what are the obstacles to mattering for me?
Hmm.
Uh, can
That's a
it be
great
the
point.
case that I get so caught up in me that nothing matters more than me, and my immediate gratification or my long-term imagined, needs or my agenda or my preoccupations? I mean, there's a moment of grave self, examination here.
Yes, sir.
Do Black lives matter to me? Profound and inescapable question. But does my little sister's life really matter to me? Does the old lady down the street matter to me? Does
Yes,
my
sir.
troublesome Uncle Harry matter to me? And it usually it's not so much that they do anything that makes them not matter. It's that somehow I've gained the center of my life. I am
Yes,
King
sir.
me. And when I'm King me, then really nobody matters. All of life is
Very
organized
true.
around my gratification and my satisfaction. And I say that I mean, we are all so prone to this,
Yeah.
that this is, it's not going to be too long before our churches get back into Lent. Uh,
Hmm.
and
Very true.
and we're shaken up again. And we get that call to conversion. And there's no more conversion greater than getting out of the center of life and saying, no, I'm really not the center of the universe. Bad news, good news. So there's no space for hospitality when nobody matters. And there's no way that anybody can matter as long as I sit in the driver's seat and
Mhm.
imagine that nothing's more important than me. But that's very hard to give up until we experience that I matter and that everybody matters to the heart of God,
Yes, sir. Very true.
and absolutely and radically. Any of our language or our efforts about radical hospitality, from my framework, which is explicitly Christian, theistic, I can only have reinforced that truth. I only come home to when I have refreshed in my own experience the reality that my life is totally dependent on, utterly derivative from, completely conditional on the baffling, all embracing love of God, which for me as
Yeah.
a Christian, I see acted out in Jesus and in the face of Jesus.
Yes, sir. Father, thank you for that answer. Man, you matter. I would just encourage folks again during this physically distanced time, and whatever social media platform, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, whether it's Snapchat, to really think about the folks that you're connected with, or Facebook, and to let them know how much they matter to you.
That's right.
When's the last time you were intentional about letting someone else know that they matter? And Father, I know you know this. One of our Jesuit values is men and women for others.
Right.
You know, what are we saying to each other? How are we embracing each other? And especially for, even if there's first year students that are coming into a university, if you're an upperclassman, feel free to just to let them know, hey, you matter to us. We appreciate you being here. Because maybe when you were there, you had a welcoming party, but now it's been a little bit different. But
That's right. That's
you
right.
you matter to us.
That's right. That's right. And the way we show that, to say it explicitly is important,
Yes, sir.
but words, but deeds are 1,000 times more effective. When
Great.
somebody sees that my flourishing academically, my happiness socially, my success on on the field hockey field or the basketball
Hmm.
court matters to somebody, especially a senior or somebody who's ahead of me. When I can see that my happiness and flourishing and success matter, I translate that automatically into what it really does mean. I matter.
Yes, sir.
I matter. And so you can imagine how clearly the opposite also translates. I don't set you up for a shot. I look for
Yeah.
opportunities to get the attention myself. I ignore you when I see that you're lonely and not included in a social event. The translation is clear and direct. You don't matter because you're not in my social group, or
Yeah.
because, God forbid, you're not from the right economic group, wearing the right clothes, or God forbid, you're from the wrong race.
Yes,
Uh,
sir.
so the mattering matters every day.
That's
And
a great
I
point.
don't understand how much mattering matters until I realize how much I matter intrinsically, not because I
Hmm.
earn it. I mean, I really would want to stress this. This is the great insight of our spiritual, of our biblical tradition. I am able to recognize how much you matter, probably, maybe, deeply only when I realize how much my mattering matters to God and is not conditional on what I do to earn mattering. How about that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now, Father Jerry,
Mhm.
I have one more question for you, but you know what? I do like what you said, and I do believe even when it comes to showing our actions, we should be intentional about letting someone know they matter that's different than us, that we may not
Absolutely.
even know, that may come from totally different backgrounds. How do we express it, even if it's a smile, even with a mask on? Eyes light up. You can tell when someone's smiling at you even through their eyes.
Right.
I see folks in the grocery store and I'll smile and they'll smile back and we have masks on, but there's a connection.
Right.
And again, that's an expression of you matter.
Can I give you an example of that, PJ? A lot of the
Please.
residents, a lot of res life folks, a lot of RAs, resident advisors, a lot of folks come. Really, it's interesting. Maybe it's because they take advantage of the opportunities, and they need to take advantage of the opportunities. Uh, but a lot of folks that I work with in res life come from other cultures, speak
Hmm.
other languages, have other homes. Um, and when I ask them about what's hard about Fairfield, is that they will tell me that it sometimes seems as though where they come from doesn't matter.
Mm.
And I think it's not just that, we get, I think it is the case that we get caught up in a majority. We assume that everybody's like us, and the majority is ipso facto reality, and we're so preoccupied about building our own small worlds or empires
Yeah.
within the familiar that we miss out on the unfamiliar. But there's such the easiest thing in the world, when there's somebody about whom I don't know anything, rather than being scared and thinking that I'm going to sound foolish, is to take the risk of asking them about where they come from.
Yes, sir.
Oh, so you're from Nigeria. Is that in East Africa? And maybe the Nigerian will laugh. No, it's in West Africa. That's okay. But basically, they're going to be so thrilled. And you say, well, can you tell me what Nigeria is like? I mean, there's a chance that somebody may say, stupid American, why don't they know anything about Nigeria? People are people. But more likely, uh, the person who comes from a different culture or language or ethnicity or background uh, is going to hear your question and translate it back into, oh, I matter. Who I am matters. So being different doesn't remove me from that sphere of mattering.
Yes,
So
sir.
it's not just people who look like me, talk like me, fool around with me who matter. Somebody has had that vision and that insight that I described my Kenyan friends as having as
Yes, sir.
he's different and he matters. So,
Yes, sir.
so the gesture, the simple recognition of the existence and the presence of the other says you matter. And the absence of any sign or gesture says you don't matter. Even if you don't mean it, that's what the translation is.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
embarrassed, I'm not interested. Anytime we get the impression I don't count, I'm of no interest, very hard not to translate that into our hearts as meaning I don't matter, which also means I don't belong. So we're back into hospitality. I only belong when I feel like I matter. So
Yes,
there is
sir.
no hospitality unless I'm made to feel simply and directly and unaffectedly as mattering. If I matter, I belong. It doesn't matter where I live. I mattered in Kenya. I belonged in Kenya because I mattered.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, Father, thank you so much for that. Last really quick question, because we like to end on something sweet.
Ah,
Father Jerry, what is your favorite dessert?
oh, the sweetest thing in the world. Oh my goodness. Now everybody, I think most people think of chocolate automatically. Uh, I don't. I think of two related things, sweet and butter and nuts together. And there are two forms. One, I've lived in the Middle East a lot, and I love Middle
Mhm.
Eastern culture and food. So I love baklava, these layers of
Oh,
thin pastry with nuts and then
yes.
with syrup or honey on top. So I love baklava. So if I'm going international, it's baklava without
Delicious.
any hesitation. If I'm staying home, it's pecan pie.
Yes, sir. Yes. Father Jerry, I missed us having our Festival of Faiths event on campus because we usually have baklava there.
Yes,
So,
for sure.
man, but we'll be back soon, one of these days. Well,
We
Father
say in
Jerry,
Arabic,
thank you.
inshallah, and inshallah, God willing,
Yes,
inshallah,
sir. Yes, sir.
inshallah.
Father Jerry, thank you so much for the privilege of coming on. We really appreciate you coming. And then thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm PJ Lucky, and this is the Diversity in Action podcast. Thank you.